This
host
conference
Annabelle as
will now
practical
be
book.
recorded.
Fantastic. And just want to say to everybody, we're using GoToMeeting, which actually isn't a webinar piece of software, and it's probably not the best piece of software we can use. But we've been using Zoom. We were horribly Zoom bombed a couple of weeks ago, so we're just in the process of finding a new webinar platform. So there's a few things that we're going to have to bodge, if you like, in terms of using this platform. But you know, it's good technology. Right. Okay, Martin. Let me just pass the microphone over to you. And I feel this feels a bit more like a radio show or a live podcast, really. So, Martin, let me pass over to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Martin, and welcome everyone. And lovely to see you all. Yes, today we're talking about webinars for learning and some tips for success. And I say we because we are more of a radio show, possibly, as Martin has just said, than a strict webinar, in the sense that we have a couple of panelists to help guide us through what they're doing and share their sorts of thoughts on making webinars really useful as a kind of learning tool. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We've got Annabelle and Charlotte from the Charity Learning Consortium who are sort of behind the scenes. They're looking after the chat as well. So if you've got any problems, then please use the chat. I think we'll use chat mostly in terms of sharing what you're thinking and questions. You know, and please do just raise anything as we go along. I think that we can do hands up and bring people in if they would like to do that as well. So that's an option. We'll just see how we roll today. And also, Martin said it's an hour long. It might be. Oh, I like the sound of that. I was sort of planning on 45 minutes, so let's say 45 minutes to an hour. Let's see how we go, and I'll be kind of timekeeping us on that. So the other thing I would like to add is that in the typical style of doing this kind of event, we had some technical problems before we started, and those technical problems have manifested in the fact that there was a huge lag between my machine and what everyone could see. So luckily, Charlotte and Annabelle have come up with a workaround, which is that they've got my slides basically. So this is working much better, but that does mean that I'm not controlling them. So I'm just going to say next slide, and then we'll just have to move through it like that. But that's today's workaround, and I think this kind of thing does happen. So it's happening to us today. So I'll go next slide, please. Can I just ask this quick question? So if you could just answer that in chat, what would make this a valuable session? And I'd like to ask this question because I think as a learning tool, this kind of technology is really interesting for what you can gather and what you can, a good way of listening to people's needs, and then hopefully providing something that people are actually wanting to find out. And right now it's kind of giving an opportunity, say, for me, Paul and Rachel, just to have and for the CLC, just to see, well, actually, so this is what you all need to know or are looking to know. So right now I'm looking at some great answers to that, do's and don'ts, tools for interactivity, how to really engage with people, what can you really realistically expect to achieve with a webinar? I think that's a really good question there from Gail. Now, the context around this is that we've put together this small book, which is less than 2,000 words, and it is jammed full of tips. And when I did it, I managed to interview some great people like Paul and Rachel. And really, today's session is a kind of an extension of that book. So what we don't get through today in terms of answering those questions, which hopefully we will, I would say that there are lots of tips in that too. So Ian, advisability having an administrator handling the technical side whilst presenting. Now we've experienced that this morning, really, because we've got some technical support. We went into a bit of a problem and we've managed to get around it, and that's because there are some people here to help. So actually my advice on that would definitely be, if you can, do it, but it's all contextual around your competence with the software, the type of event you're putting on, how big it is, how complex it is. But I think as a rule of thumb, it's really useful to have someone who can help in the background. But I'll let my expert speakers tell us what they think about things like that. So right, so we'll go on to the next slide. Thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts on that. So I'm going to introduce our lovely panel, Rachel and Paul. Rachel, can I go to you first? Can you just quickly tell us a bit about what you do and the organisation for whom you do it for?
Of course. Hi, morning everybody. My name is Rachel Winfield. I work at Leeds University Students' Union, which is the student union at the University of Leeds, and it doesn't sound like a charity, I'll give you that, but I promise we are. We're a not-for-profit organisation, so all the money that we make goes back to our members. We have about 39,000 members at the University of Leeds, and we have 600 staff who look after those. About 450 of those are our student staff who we employ to give them extra skills and a bit of cash, and 150 of those are career staff like myself. So we're not students, we just wish we were. And we're supported through all of that by about 3,000 volunteers who we call student leaders. So I might use either terminology throughout this today.
Great. And Paul, tell us a bit about.
Hey everyone, yeah, it's Paul here. I'm from the Salvation Army Housing Association. I've got a grand title, HRBP Organisational Development, which is just ridiculous. But I try and sum it up in 3 words. It's learning, it's performance, it's engagement. So that's where I play. I've just been here over a year, so it's my first foray into not-for-profit and to housing associations. So it's been a real big learning for me. Quite a small to medium housing association in the grand scheme of things. Bit under the umbrella of the Salvation Army, but we are our own entity, so we are run and by ourselves. Obviously, we filter into some of the good work they do. Basically, we have a variety of services to support mental health, young mothers, people with addiction, and a variety of different life situations. So our services really help people to overcome homelessness and get people back on their feet again after whatever has put them into that situation. So really, worthwhile as well. So good to be here. Hopefully I can be of help to everyone and hopefully to myself.
Great, Paul, and thank you, Rachel. So if we go on to the next slide, please. Now, slightly left field, but I like to ask this question a lot of the time. I'm a big fan of appreciative inquiry, and I think we all would probably recognise the fact that these are tough times to be operating in. So could you just share in chat what's going well in learning in your organisation currently? And you might be thinking, what's this got to do with webinars and tips for learning webinars? I think it can be useful just to be thinking about to remind ourselves what is working right now, because it'd be interesting to see what people have to say. Interesting, the adaptations we've made to keep engaging with the public. So some of these are really interesting because if I didn't know better, I'd say that these were some of the big challenges facing learning teams 3 months ago, 4 months ago. These are the things that people would like to have cracked or needed to. And, you know, look at this: agility, flexibility, responsiveness, adaptation. I mean, this is extraordinary. It gives me goosebumps to look at that, to think about how good learning teams have been at responding to these extraordinary times. And I think that's that idea of you know, being a catalyst. I mean, we just haven't had any choices. We've just had to flip from one thing to the next. And in some senses, we all find ourselves here, you know, in platforms like this. And I think, you know, there is a link with kind of what I'm asking there and what we're doing today. But thank you for sharing that. I think that's really, it's just very interesting to see how much good stuff is going on, despite the fact that we are in really tough times. And it does show how adaptable we all are. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you for that. So we're going to go through these 4 questions. These were the advertised questions, and I'm hoping that they will be useful in also answering some of the questions that you shared at the beginning when we said what would make this useful. There were lots of questions around engagement, length of session, interactivity, motivating learners. So I'm hoping that we will be able to get through that in some of these questions. So what I'll do is I'll ask our panel how they are doing what they are doing, and then we'll stop after each question and ask if there are any other questions you'd like to ask. So, how are you using webinars in your learning offering? So, Paul, let's start with you. What you're doing very interesting things, aren't you? So, what exactly? How are you doing it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we have done, and it seemed the most obvious thing to do, is to move our induction online. So that's one thing we've done, and we've looked at that. But I suppose another thing we looked at, and I mentioned it in the book as well, where what I've tried to get the business to do is to really distill what are the key challenges in the businesses, and then run really small sessions, and we call them micro webinars, where it's literally a 15-minute burst of stuff, whatever that stuff is. So, you know, the obvious stuff at the moment is, you know, learning at home, you know, learning on the job, you know, working under pressure, resilience, you know, some of those big topics that are very pertinent at the moment. But the whole purpose is to make that session really specific, and typically with one outcome, which is really hard because as learning professionals, sometimes we like to cram it all in and fill our slides up and give stuff, because we're quite a giving bunch. You know, we really want to make things, but for me, it's less about content in those sessions and more about the challenge. And I know, and it's really trying to make the challenge work for your business. So talking their language, I think, is really important. So you've got to get out there and know your business, which I think sometimes we're guilty of not doing because we step back. And I think that's so. The concept of micro webinars is really worked for us. Them, you know, as many times as you want throughout a day, a week, or over a period of time. It's really flexible. Almost a little less pressure on you as an owner. You don't have to remember stuff. You can just focus on one aspect, and that's really helpful as well. And then you can bring in, like you would normally do, relevant experts, or just having a colleague next to you in the virtual setting. So yeah, that's something that's really worked for us.
And while we're on the micro webinars, quickly, Paul, Helen's just asked, are they live or recorded?
Both, yeah. So we record them all. Obviously people can join. So there's a regular slot. So it's a bit like a radio show. So you have your regular slot, and I'm the DJ for a better term. and they're recorded. So obviously for those who can't make it, they can go to a library of content that we can put on our learning system. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Paul. And Rachel, how are you using webinars as part of your learning offering?
So we actually just invested in the platform in January. So it's quite new to our organisation, and it got a very rapid induction earlier this year. Interesting to see all those comments actually, because I spent the better part of January and February trying to influence my entire organisation about the benefits of webinars to somewhat deaf ears, and then come March they're all banging on my door virtually trying to get hold of them. So we introduced webinars really to resolve a problem that we were having with our volunteers, our student leaders. Having 3,000 of them and about 20 of our staff team dedicated to looking after them, we had a real problem with offering them really engaging learning and development opportunities. So when we introduced the Moodle platform, we used that for a lot of compliance-based training with those teams, and that was obviously really useful at tracking and making sure everyone was safe and knew what they needed to know. But we were really missing that engagement with those people, and they always said they loved classroom-based sessions with us, but they never came. And trying to run effective classroom sessions for 3,000 people without spending 6 months of your calendar year doing it was really difficult. So we needed a solution that allowed us to reach a really wide audience, but do it in a way that also had that opportunity to engage and have that sort of human contact. So for us, webinars really fitted that. So our student leaders do their compliance-based and knowledge inductions online on the Moodle platform. And then they start their whole journey off with us with a webinar with a couple of people from the team that looks after them. And that webinar is all about celebrating their new role and welcoming them into the organisation. And, that's challenging because a lot of people have talked about how to engage people through virtual means. And, I facilitate training in classrooms, or at least I used to before all this kicked off. And, I get that standing in front of somebody and trying to draw them in feels easier than sitting in front of your webcam trying to draw them in. But it's a way that we can connect with those people. They can put a face to the people that are looking after them. They can feel like we're opening up our doors to them. And so for us, it really sort of fit that gap that we had in a ability to reach them and celebrate them. So that was initially why we got the platform. We've recently obviously been using it in a lot of different ways. We found it really useful in our comms strategy centrally. So we run a weekly virtual huddle, and we invite everyone from our staff team to come and watch that. And it's a bit like a news show, I suppose. We have one of our senior leadership team come on first and do the whole welcome everybody, and here's the latest from the organisation. And we invite every team to do an update on that. So some of them film themselves giving an update. Some of them just give written updates, but it's a real sort of roundup. And then we finish it all off with our heroes of the week. So everyone nominates the people who they want to be a hero, and we kind of celebrate that in the platform. And we never thought that we would use webinar platforms like that. But actually, it's something that we're thinking when we go back, if we ever go back, that we'll continue to do, because it just works so much better than trying to get 20 people in a room and tell them what's happening and they tell their teams. It seems like a much better solution for us.
Interesting. So more of a comms tool for you as well as a learning tool.
Yeah, we're definitely using it as both.
Yeah. And are your stakeholders embracing it then? Because you said you went from 0 to 60, through January to March. So how did you get them on board then to go from not doing news on a webinar platform to doing that for you?
So my calendar in February was marked by face-to-face meetings with key stakeholders, where I would show them the platform and try to convince them of all the ways in which they could, start using it and embracing it. And then when I look at my calendar in March, it's meetings that are the same. They're all about training people how to use the platform, but they've been put into my calendar by other people, not me. So the real drive from my organisation started when we used the platform regularly with them as a comms tool, and they saw it firsthand for themselves. And I think that really clicked something in their heads where they thought, oh, this would be useful for me to use in this way. And because we are quite a small staff team, really, realistically, they know me. I'm not exactly an IT wizard. And I think they thought, if she can do it, I can probably do it. So, that worked really well in our organisation because of who we are and our staff team. But it really was a catalyst. COVID-19 was a real catalyst in terms of all the digital tools that we've had at our disposal for years. It's forced people to sort of use them, which is fantastic, for us. Not much else is fantastic about this.
So picking up on that, then you've had to really accelerate using this technology. So Paul, if I come back to you, we go on to the second question. So what are the skills and tips that that make this successful? What have you had to do differently or learn or start doing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of parallels to what you would normally do in the classroom. So don't think that they're all redundant. So you're not having to learn lots of new skills. I mean, absolutely you are. So the skills of good questioning and good listening, they work really well, whatever delivery you're doing, whether it's face-to-face or virtual. I think what you have to become more comfortable at doing is the multiple roles that you play in a virtual setting. I think that, so it's the flexibility. So you're being part technician, you're being part chat monitor, and you're being part deliverer of content. And so it's the ability to be able to see and interact with multiple different touch points through a session. So getting used to that. So it's almost you've got like a dashboard of stuff in front of you. So you've got to think of the content, you've got to think about, how to engage your audience, and you've got to deal with maybe a technical problem as well. So certainly the multitasking is put under more strain sometimes. So I've certainly always work alongside someone, just as we are today. You've got a couple of people focused on sort of the tech side and the chat side. I think also, what else have I been focusing in terms of skills? I suppose for me is feeling comfortable with looking at yourself. I know that sounds a bit weird. So, for the first time, you're like, God, who's that on the screen? Oh, it's me, right? Just feeling comfortable with how you're coming across, and I think sometimes, people can worry too much about their hair. I don't have too much worry with that department, so that's one thing to worry less about. But just feeling comfortable seeing yourself, I think, is something that just go with it. It's part of who you are, so that there's that piece there as well. So those are probably the two that sort of stick out for me.
And Rachel, how about you? What have you found yourself doing that you weren't doing previously?
I think it's easy to be scared by the technology involved with this, and one of the things that was really useful for us when we started out with our webinars was we very quickly moved from getting a platform, me trying to learn it, to me trying to teach other people how to use it. And actually, I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, but me trying to teach others how to use it actually taught me a lot more about the way to use the platform and how to use it. than I think if I'd spend hours trying to do it myself without teaching anybody, because they ask questions that you hadn't necessarily thought of, and they force you to kind of investigate different ways to do things than perhaps you know, you naturally would just by yourself. I agree with what Paul said there. I mean, everything Paul said I agree with, but definitely about getting to know your face and the way that you look. And you know, we all do it. You know, it's hard to do any kind of virtual meetings nowadays without occasionally, like, you know, watching yourself, which seems counterproductive to having the meeting in the first place. But you know, part of that engagement, I find, is you get it by being yourself. And it doesn't matter if, you know, naturally you're not somebody who's comfortable performing and, you know, being that person who's big and engaging. You just have to be yourself and connect with people in the best way that you can, in the same way that you would do, you know, in a classroom situation as a facilitator. Because I think the benefit of webinars over somebody watching a video is that connection with, you know, somebody else, and it is that ability to ask questions, but it's the connection to seeing somebody else and having that engaging sort of conversation. So knowing yourself and how you deliver things is important. And I also think, you know, it is just designing learning. I'm assuming everybody in the room today is some sort of L&D person, you know, and works in the field in some way. And it is just about finding your aims, finding your objectives, and finding the right way of delivering that to be most effective for your stakeholders. So,
yeah. So it's interesting, we've had some really great sharing in chat, and so engagement came up at the beginning of today's session as one of those things, like how do you engage people in this environment? And we've had some really good things. Was it Emily with the GIF idea? GIF ideas in Microsoft Teams. But what, you know, and I have to say that we've kind of done this as a panel discussion, and the idea was to ask Paul and Rachel to share some of their insights on what they've been doing, because I think they're doing some interesting things. And Paul rightly said, well, yesterday we had a chat through this, so why don't we have a poll? And of course we can't have a poll because we're in GoToMeeting and not GoToWebinar. And that tells you two things. The first thing it tells you is really know your software and what you need from it, because you need to select the stuff that gives you what you need to do. So we can't do that. But also, it was an interesting discussion about, well, how far do we want to go down the route of kind of demonstrating all the things you could do in terms of engagement in a session like this. And we've opted for the kind of radio show type approach, but we're using chat. And so I'm coming back in a very long-winded way to say, what other engagement tips would you have for making these kind of sessions we're talking about really useful and for learners? Yeah. Paul, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for me that it's the frequency of how you're interacting. So if you think about it in a classroom setting, you'd introduce a concept, you have a chat, you might have a little activity, and that can be 15, 20 minutes. But that's ramped up, you know, double, triple that in the virtual world, because you're having to stimulate your audience more often, you know, thinking about every minute or two, you're having to sort of shift, because people, you know, naturally move away from the screen. So, you know, I think your content on your slides, really important. I think the activities, you know, the change of the voices, so having many presenters, you know, getting you where you can, obviously, platforms allowing, so audio, getting some videos in, polls, whiteboards, breakouts, you know, just, you've got to mix it up. And I think it's already been said, don't be scared by it. You know, some of this might fall down, and it has fallen down with me, and you pick yourself up like you would in a face-to-face session. You know, not everything goes well in a face-to-face session, but you just have to pick yourself up and get on with it. So for me, that's why I sort of kicked off with the micro webinars, because even though you're only doing a short piece of time, actually the amount of information and stuff you need in that 15 minutes is probably just as much as you would need in a in a one-day session or half-day session, because you're having to really think about how you can get stuff in there. It almost sounds counterintuitive, but you think how many slides go into a 15-minute session versus a session you might do over the day. Sometimes there's surprising what the difference is. So yeah, so a typical session I'd sometimes have about 20 or 30 slides, 15 minutes, which sounds a bit too many.
Wow.
Because I'm changing screens, I'm doing stuff, video, and it's amazing how it all sort of adds up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting concept. Have a play with it. It's quite interesting.
Yeah. And for everyone here today, you'll notice that we haven't got 30 slides or anything near that. So I've gone for a completely different approach. But that's really, thank you. And I love the encouragement, Paul, just to, there are loads of things you can do in these platforms. We are kind of, and it's not just a case of using them for the sake of it, but actually really thinking about
make sure they have
how
a
you
purpose.
can use them. Yeah. And Rachel, how about you? What sort of engagement tactics are you using?
So I would just pick up on something actually Emily just said in the chat, which I think is really useful, which is about engagement is more about what are we offering people and what do they need. There is loads of things out there that you can do with webinars. You can use polls, you can show videos, you can invite people to step away from the screen and take 10 minutes to work on an activity. There's loads of tools there to digitalize most things that we would do in the classroom, but it is essentially about that learning design and what it is we want people to do and learn and achieve at the end of this webinar. So I think that's a really important point, because I fall into the same category as Paul. I'm a believer that if you're going to have content on your screen, you need to keep it moving. I'd invite you, next time you watch telly, watch every time a shot changes. I guarantee you won't be waiting more than 7 seconds at the most, because they keep things moving to keep people's attention. And I'm not saying that my webinars are like, a Marvel film. They are nowhere near that. But it is, if you're going to use a heavy PowerPoint based webinar, you do need to keep things moving, or at least keep your face there to have somebody to look, something else to look at. But really, I would say it is all about going back to that learning design and identifying what it is you want people to get out of the session, and then use tools that are appropriate to that, rather than get carried away by trying to use too many of the things that they have in these platforms. Just use the ones that work best for you.
Interesting. And I think I would thank you for both of you for sharing that. I think the other, I would add a slightly different focus. I work with a charity for whom accessibility is a massive issue, and actually the pace of events is really important. So and I've learned an awful lot around, well, what does engagement look like in the context of that organisation and its community? And it's quite different, actually. And I think that's, one thing I would add is just by doing this and asking the question and listening, you can very quickly get a sense of, what's working for people. And I think that, you've both said that, but I would reiterate that, because the context in which I've been working there is very different to some of the things we've just talked about here. But you wouldn't know that unless you started to work with that community of people for whom the pace of delivery and the type of engagement are really important. So it's actually having things like quiet spaces during sessions, having a breakout room where you can go to have quiet time and things like that, which are really valuable to the experience as well. So that's great. So pitfalls, bear traps, what absolutely shouldn't we be doing but when we are doing webinars in learning? Rachel.
So a lot of this is based on my own personal preferences and opinions. But you know, I'm assuming by now we've all been to plenty of webinars, virtual meetings, things like that. And you know, the thing I hate the most is when you get somebody come on and they say good morning to you or hello, and then they turn their webcam off and they put a PowerPoint presentation on and they read a script, and you know, you're just watching someone's slideshow and you think, well, you should have just made me a video because I could just pause that and watch that in my own time. And you know, for me, I want something extra with a webinar. If I'm gonna, you know, make the time to stop what I'm doing and go to an event, I want it to be something that is going to engage me by giving me something that I haven't already got. At the very least, you know, entertain me in a little way, so that it's, you know, a break from the monotony of my day. And I think people can sometimes jump on the webinar bandwagon because it seems like the thing that they should be doing. But, you know, I do feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again. If it's not the right way to deliver that message, that piece of learning, that opportunity, then, you know, don't use it. Find a different way to do that, I would say.
I think it's really good advice. As Nicola has said, I sat through someone reading a technical briefing last week via a Word document on a screen. It really can be that bad, you know. Really, you know, our job is to make sure that doesn't happen. By the sounds of it, I feel sorry for you, Nicola. Paul, what would you add?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I'd echo everything that's just been said. You know, don't take a slide deck and just stick it in a virtual setting. It doesn't work, and it goes back to my points about the frequency of how you engage with your audience is a lot quicker as well. I think other pitfalls, I mean, we probably briefly mentioned it already, you know, it's being au fait with the platform you're using. So I think people acknowledge that you will make maybe one mistake, and that's fine. But if you start consistently doing it, I think then credibility goes. So that make sure you do know and test, where we've heard that before. It practice beforehand. You know, work with someone and actually practice the whole delivery. Just as we've done, you know, we've had a couple of conversations already about how today would look. You know, we can't plan for everything, but don't just assume stuff. You know, so you know, prepare as well. I think is definitely, and I've mentioned it as well. You know, be your real self and not a robotic self. I think there's a tendency to be a bit of a robot in this world because I don't know, I get the sense of, you know, your personality needs to shine through. So don't sort of be restricted by the fact that you're looking at one screen. I know you haven't got the 3 dimensions that you're probably used to if you're a regular trainer in the room, but you know, don't fall into the trap becoming a bit of a robot. So be yourself, I think, as well, because otherwise you could turn into that person reading that Word document, which is quite boring for everyone as well. So
I think also, I think they're great points. I think it's really important that we also are students of what we deliver and create, you know, by actually going on other events and understanding what's good and what's not. You know, I think people are sharing that, you know, there are bad examples, but there are also good examples that can really work well. And I think it's, you know, I'm sure we would all encourage each other to do more of that, and maybe go out of our sector and just having a look at how someone does something. And so I think we've talked about this a bit. I mean, you've been talking about sort of blended approaches, really. You know, both of you are saying, I mean, Rachel, you definitely were talking about the fact that webinars are a part of, you know, more than just being a webinar delivery mechanism for learning. So what's, you know, just quickly, we talk about the blended approach. How does all that work then currently?
Sorry, are you asking me?
Yeah, sorry, Rachel.
Sorry. Going really well, that. Pay attention when someone asks you a question. Yeah, so we use the blended approach quite a lot in LUU for a lot of our solutions to learning, and you know the platform's quite new for us. We've only been using it since January, so we've only really trialed this blended induction approach. We're about to have, you know, our real defining moment when we've got about 2,000 people over the next month coming on board. So you know, I'll let you know in a month whether it's really worked or not. But you know, a lot of the chat today has been about fatigue as well, this visual online fatigue. And I think what we could do definitely is in our blend consider that a little bit more, because we don't really give people the activities away from the screen like we would have done in a classroom based situation. And so today's been really useful for me, because actually that's prompted a little bit of thinking in my head about, we give them training through the Moodle, we do webinars, we show them videos, but it's all very screen based. And you know, maybe it's time we started looking at some of that other stuff to take it away. So I want to thank everybody today because you've helped my organisation.
Great. And Paul, how about you? You got your micro webinars, and how are they fitting in with the
Yeah, I mean,
offering?
yeah, webinars certainly haven't taken over the world here at Zaha, but they're certainly more prominent. So you know, I think whatever sort of solution we're working on, you know, I think you know, exploring whether webinars are the right fit for what you want to do. I'm a bit of an optimist anyway. I think, you know, you can push any content into the virtual world if you want to, and are willing to work through what that means. But I'm not also in the school of making sure that you know, I'm not going to be turning everything virtual. You know, I think there is the time for it as well. So it's probably about, I suppose at the moment it's 15-20% of our, I suppose, learning that goes on. Maybe not that high actually. Maybe I'm being a bit, yeah, 10 or 15%. So there's lots of other ways that we still continue to learn here at Zaha, or at least I'm trying to engage people in that as well. So
great. Now, so we've got to through our 4 questions. Or anything else? If you've got any other questions that you wanted to ask, I know we're 45 minutes in, but we can really kind of we can draw things to a close fairly rapidly, actually. So is there anything that we haven't answered? I think in terms of, Jenny, you're asking about accessibility. I can share some stuff, Martin, that maybe there are some really interesting online accessibility events coming up. There's a big 3-day event next week, actually. And also there are a couple of other people that I would point you to whose work is all around accessibility in this kind of environment. So, and I would come back to what you said, Rachel, about we're talking about the technology platforms. Well, actually, if you want, I noticed that there hasn't been a lot of work done. If you said, what are the most accessible webinar platforms, you'd be hard pushed to go to a one source of truth on that. You actually really have to have a good look at how they work. And so it's not just a case of what your delivery and design is, it's actually what, you know, how accessible is the platform to use as a kind of end user. So if we don't have any other questions, then I just wanted to ask optimum length. Now, we had talked about engagement. Now you're talking 15 minutes, Paul. Do we have any other thoughts on, I mean, it's always contextual on what you're trying to achieve and how you're trying to achieve it, but is there, Emily wants to ask about advertising. Sorry, we need to come to that question. You could quickly answer that about.
Yeah, we use it through our usual channels. So for us, it's Yammer. So we use Yammer, which is a new tool for us. We use our intranet page. We've also got our LMS where we can push out automated messages. So we do, and we have like a people team update, which is a month. Well, it's more of a bi-weekly thing. So there's a couple of ways in which we advertise this to our audience, and people come through those ways generally.
And Rachel, do you do it around that?
Yeah, it's all the same ways. We use our internal comms channels for our staff, and you know, for our student leaders, we either use the Moodle platform or through direct contact with them, particularly their induction. You know, it's quite easy to engage them right at the beginning, so we get quite high numbers for that one.
Yeah.
And then and then we use our standard communication channels.
So Ian's asking about slide design. Now we're getting quite granular. So, and I was thinking when I was doing this that I've been told on a webinar that my slides are absolutely awful, and I've, you know, in some senses that sort of thing I find is a very good provocation, because I quite like going and saying, well, you know, I'm just going to do it like this anyway. But it's a really good question, and Emily has shared a link. I can share. We can share some. Martin, I presume we can share some other resources, because I've got some around accessibility. There's some really interesting stuff around slide design, actually, which will answer some of those questions. And I think Claire, we're talking about length of session, and I think, you know, it is about context, isn't it? You know, it's kind of, it's interesting, Paul, that you said your 15-minute session has one outcome, so it's really focused.
Yeah, it is,
so,
and less is more for me. So I mean, I know you put your slide up, so I would have those 4 questions on 4 separate slides. That's why it's really easy to get up your slide count quite easily, but less is more for me. You know, so
I will take that back, and I will work on my slide design. He didn't say he didn't like them, he just gave me some very useful advice on how many questions to have on a slide, so thank you for that. So if we go to the next slide, I think we're going to quickly wrap it up. We've done the end. Let's move on to the one after that. Just a quick, did you get what you needed? And I will go through the chat, and there's been, so the things, the resources to share, I can pull that together so that we can send you a kind of curated list of hopefully useful people to go and check out, stuff to go and look at around all the things that you've asked. That's not a problem. So I'm hoping that you got what you needed. We're going to try and stick to that last, coming in more, closer to 45 minutes than 60. Thanks, David. Thanks, Ian. Good. And if there is anything else that we haven't covered, then we can do that offline. I know people are leaving. So if we go to the next slide, there's the book. That's me. I'd like to, and let's go to the next slide, our final slide. So I need to be able to thank everyone. I need to thank everyone that's been here today. Thank you for your time and coming along, and for sharing. I'm sharing all the great things that you're doing, because when you said what's going well, you shared some wonderful things. And thank you for all the questions, reflections, tips. And I would say that my one reflection of a lot of the webinars I've done is that a lot of people find them useful just to connect to each other in chat. That sometimes is enough. And I think that's a really interesting aspect. So there's that, you know, conversation, connection, and there's the content, but that's that the connection with ideas and the connection with each other are really useful. And then I'd like to say thank you to everyone at the CLC who has helped today when we had our technical problems. You're cool as cucumbers, and we iron that out. And of course, Martin. So it's Charlotte, Annabelle, and Martin for hosting. And finally, but most importantly, Rachel and Paul, who have given us lots of their time in just working on this, in the book, and thank you for your insights today.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Martin. A couple of things if I can just pick up before we go. We are creating a digital goodie bag, as we call it, which will be a link to the recording and any resources that we talk about actually on this session will include a link to the book. And also want to say that really this is the first of a couple of webinars that we're running on this subject. And the next one is on the 9th of July, and it's called Getting Started with Virtual Classrooms. And so we're going to be delving in a little bit more into how to create learning sessions, if you like. And one thing that I've been struggling with over the last couple of months, I suppose, is now there's a lot of terminology, people talking about webinars, talking about virtual classrooms, blended learning. We're now seeing live podcasts, which I thought podcasts were audio, so I suppose a vodcast, I don't know. And I think what we've done today is very much like a podcast, a live podcast. And so for all of you who are here from Chelsea members, we are doing virtual coffee mornings, which is similar. And the one next week is we're going to be looking at a mentoring scheme. There's a group of charities who have got together, 8 different charities, and created a mentoring scheme between them. And they're going to be talking at our virtual coffee morning next week, and we're going to be looking at potentially rolling that out further across the CLC. So lots of interesting things coming up. Martin, I'd just like to thank you. Thanks for helping. Thanks for creating the book. I absolutely love the little book. It's one of those things that if we were in, 3 months ago, it would have been printed, and you get an actual copy after this session. And at the members' meetings themselves, we'd give them out to make sure that we get your feedback forms. But no, that's not going to happen for a while. But it will be available as a PDF download. Also, I think we're going to put it up onto the Kindle platform and also onto iBooks as well. So make sure that everybody gets a copy of that. And a massive thank you to both Paul and Rachel for supporting us here, and also with the white paper that I'm not allowed to talk about yet. So that's going to be a surprise over the next few weeks. Right, unless there's any questions, thank you everybody for attending. This wouldn't happen without you guys. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.